Hi guys, can you hear me? Just leave a post in the live chat if you can hear my voice coming through things. And also let me know about the volume. If it's too high, too low, we'll see if we can work something out. Okay, there we go. So we should have video now, and the audio, again, just let me know if it's too loud, too quiet. I can adjust it a little bit. I can't make it too loud or too quiet depending on different people's speakers or headphones. But as long as it's okay for everyone, somewhere in the middle, then when we're good to go. On the, I guess on your left-hand side, we have a little whiteboard. I'm only using a mouse, so I don't have a lot of options with it, but I can do some basic typing, things like that. I'd rather use my voice and be able to speak to you. I also do have a smaller whiteboard down here, but again, I'd rather explain, give you guys a chance to practice your listening. And I'll try and focus on the lens as much as possible, so I'm talking directly to you. But I do need to keep one eye on the chat just to make sure I'm reading all the comments coming through. I also have to keep one eye on the stream to make sure the quality is okay, to make sure it hasn't broken down and just stopped working or my internet's died, something like that. So don't mind if my eyes move a little bit left and right. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just making sure everything's working. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Is there something you've been wanting to ask a native speaker, a teacher, and haven't had the opportunity to? Is there some parts of grammar that's confusing you, some vocabulary, some pronunciation? We'll try and answer the more specific questions first. But if you want to have a more general, broad question like how can I improve my speaking, how can I improve my listening, I'll be able to give you some tips for that as well. Just post them in the live chat. I'll give them a read, and we'll start answering them. I'm very well, Raza. Thank you for asking. So we'll go for about 60 minutes. We'll see how many questions we have coming through. It's about 5 minutes past the hour now. If people are still interested and they're still asking more questions, we'll keep going. I have no problem extending it. But if we feel like we've asked the questions we want to ask, we can end it there. It's no problem. It's up to you. I feel very well. I've had quite a long day of work. I started at about 7 a.m. and I worked for 10 hours at my school doing some teaching. And then after work, I came home, I had dinner, and I tried to get this set up as quickly as possible. But I feel good. How are you guys? Are you feeling okay? Again, any questions, post them in the live chat. Don't be worried if you feel like this question might be a bit simple for other learners, or on the other side, if you're worried that your question might be quite advanced. I'll try and scale the level of the language. So we'll cover the basic parts of the question, so the intermediate level points, and if the person asking the question is a high enough level, I'll look at some more advanced options. So we'll try and cover a little bit for everyone. Sure, I'm happy to introduce myself. And I've just got another great question come through, which we'll take a look at, but I'll introduce myself first. For those who don't know me, who haven't seen any of my other videos, or aren't a member of my Facebook page, where we post basically 3 or 4 times a day, it's very active. My name is Edward. I am from England, but I lived there for only about 3 years. For 3 years, I lived in a town called Reading, which is about 30 minutes outside London. It's very, very close to London. My parents come from, one's from the north of England and one's from the south of England, so we have a little bit of a mix of different accents there. When I was 3 years old, I moved to the United States, into America, so you might hear some American in my accent as well. I lived in a state called Connecticut, which is in the northeast of the US. It's just outside New York City. So I've lived just outside London, and I've also lived just outside New York, so 2 of the biggest cities in the world for the English-speaking countries. After that, I've lived in Singapore and Thailand. I attended what we call international schools there. So even though I'm in a non-native English-speaking country, I'm following the, in my case, English system for both schools. Then I studied in Australia for university, and now I'm working in Asia as an English teacher. So I've got some experience with English-speaking, English accents, with American accents, and with Australian accents, and also some Canadian accents. I have quite a few Canadian friends. Okay, we have a good question here. Must versus have to. For must and have to, we consider them to be modal verbs, but specifically, they're called modals of obligation. An obligation is something that you don't have a choice in. It's something where, it's somewhat like a rule, right? Somebody is telling you to do this thing, and you don't have the decision to be made whether or not you want to do it or don't want to do it. It's something that you must do. Must is probably the most common one we use as an obligation, telling someone you must do something. We also use, as you noted, have to, and another common one is need to. The difference between these 3 is basically non-existent. You can use must do something, need to do something, and have to do something. They all mean that the listener has no choice in it. There's a little bit of a structural difference. You'll notice that with have and need, we use to plus the infinitive, have to do something, need to do something. With must, we do not use the infinitive. It's always, we don't use to, we only use the infinitive. It's must plus the infinitive. You must do something. Apart from that grammatical difference, you can use them basically interchangeably. There's no situation where one is preferred to another one. It comes down to a personal preference in terms of the speaker about which one they feel more comfortable. using. Personally, I don't use need to that often. I use must and have to. It's just what I grew up with. There'd be nothing grammatically wrong with me saying, you need to do this, or you need to do that. That's fine. I just don't naturally use it that often. If we look at the negative forms, they change a little bit, which might be where your confusion comes from. So he said must, have to, and need to is an obligation. The person has no choice. It's a rule. If we change it to the negative form, don't have to, don't need to, or must not, they're not equal. Must not, usually contracted to mustn't, right, is an obligation. If I say you mustn't do that, the person has no choice. It's a rule. They're not allowed to do that. If I say you don't need to do something, or you don't have to do something, it's no longer an obligation. The person actually has a choice in the matter. I'm telling them that it is not a rule, and it's up to them whether or not they want to proceed. If we look at some rules in the office, some common rules in the office, you must show up on time. You have to speak politely to your peers. Those are people who are equal to you, or your seniors, your boss. You need to dress appropriately. Some offices have a more casual attire, but most offices request formal, a collared shirt like this, maybe even a tie if you're a guy. Depends on the office. So these are things we must do, we have to do, we need to do. If I say you must not, mustn't, again, it's a rule. You mustn't be late, or you mustn't arrive late. Those are rules. If I say you don't have to or don't need to, it's no longer a rule. I'm saying there's a choice for the person. For example, on Fridays, a lot of offices have a casual rule. You don't have to wear formal clothes on Friday. It's called Casual Friday. You can say you don't need to wear formal clothes on Friday. I'm not saying they're not allowed to wear formal clothes on Friday. If they want to, they can. But it's not a rule. It's not required. So don't have to and don't need to show that there's not a rule. The negative form of another modal verb, which is a rule, just the same as mustn't, is cannot. If I say you cannot do something, it means it's a rule and you are not allowed to do it. So we can start with the modals of obligation with the rule yes, you must, you need to, and you have to. When we want to present a choice, we can say you don't need to or you don't have to. Another option is can. You can do this. It's up to you. Rules for things which are not allowed, you must not and you cannot. I hope that answers your question. It's a good question. Something that a lot of people are confused by, but actually it's probably because there are so many different options which causes the confusion. It's something that a lot of people struggle with in English is what we call language depth. So every language can essentially communicate every different point. If I have an opinion, if I want to express a feeling to somebody, basically every language has a way of doing this. Because English is a language built on other languages, we have a lot of Latin influences, we have a lot of Germanic influences, and with the modern world, we basically steal words from every language. Pajamas is a word from Hindi, I believe, from India. We have a lot of even Aborigine words from Australia. English is a language which steals from all over. Because of that, we have a very deep language depth. It means there are many different ways to say the exact same thing. If you type in a word in Google and you put the word synonym after that word, you'll find there's 5, 10, 15 different words which have the same meaning. And it's normally because we have the Germanic version, we have the Latin version, maybe we have something of East European influence. It's a combination. That's why there are often many different ways to say the same thing in English, which can be confusing. Okay, we have thus, hence, and otherwise. How can we use thus, hence, and otherwise? Ooh, let's see if I can do some writing with my mouse. I promise my handwriting is actually good, but with my mouse, not so good. Although it's fun. Thus and hence are not so different. Otherwise, unless I'm not understanding the context that you want to use it, it's a little bit different. We'll start with otherwise, then we'll go through thus and hence. I'll give you some examples. Otherwise presents an alternative, another option. For example, I might say, I feel like, you'll see me use this example a lot because I love pizza. I want to eat pizza for dinner. Otherwise, I could eat a hamburger. What that means is, this is one option I want, but there's another option available. You're not limiting it to only one. Thus and hence show a result. Similar to how you can use so or therefore to show a result. Thus and hence are more formal, so they're used more for writing, particularly academic writing. So using, if you're in university, you might use them a lot to show the results of something. Even if you're still in high school, or if you have to write reports for your work, hence and thus. Again, they just show a result. Profits from Q1 were very strong. Thus, we will invest more money in this area of our business. Same for hence. The new employee has proved himself to be of high quality. Hence, we have offered him a full-time contract. Something like that. It just shows the result. In the same way, you can use so or therefore. Is that the meaning of otherwise that you were looking for, or do you have another idea of how otherwise can be used? If you do, just throw it in the comments and we'll take a look at it. Hello, Roberto. How are you doing? Good to see you. So could you explain what you mean when you say grammatically? Do you not understand the word grammatically, or would you like me to go into more detail about the actual grammatical structure of these words? I'll be happy to talk about hence and thus. They are quite easy in terms of their grammar. If you know how to use so, or if you know how to use because in a sentence, then hence and thus are not too bad. We'll look at because, and then we'll switch it over to so, because the two are very closely connected. And then we can just replace so with hence and thus. If I tell you that I feel hungry because I haven't eaten, the reason for my hunger is because I haven't had any food. We can switch the reason to be the starting clause in that sentence. I haven't eaten anything, so I'm hungry. Right? So we go from having the reason at the result of the beginning to the reason at the end. We use because in the middle. And if we want to switch it and have the reason first, the result at the end, we use so. That's a big difference between because and so. Hence can just simply, hence and thus, just replace the word so. Take so out, put hence or thus in. But as I mentioned, they're more formal. I would not recommend using them in your general conversation unless it's some kind of presentation at work or presentation at university or school. Then hence and thus are good to use. Otherwise, just stick to so. So is much better for general day-to-day conversation. Okay, great. Glad I could help. Can you recommend any student radio stations or radios with talk shows for improving listening skills? Okay, good question. I'm not going to recommend any specific radio stations, but listening to things online is a great way to improve your listening skills. What I want you to do, though, is rather than looking for a podcast or a radio station which is focusing on teaching English, although that's okay, I want you to try and find a podcast or a radio show which talks about something that you're interested in, a topic that you really like learning about, a topic that you maybe don't know a lot about, but you want to improve your knowledge, or maybe you do know a lot about it, but you want to hear other people's opinions and perspectives on this topic. The reason why I recommend you do that, rather than trying to find a podcast or radio which teaches English, is because you probably won't get bored listening to it. If you force yourself to really learn a lot of English, like just get as much English into your brain as possible, it's going to be a bit overwhelming. You might get a little bit unmotivated and probably won't want to keep learning. If you are listening to a radio show or a podcast which is talking about a topic you're interested in, and they just happen to be using the English language, well, suddenly your interest will stay and your motivation will stay high, because you're not necessarily listening just to improve your English, you're also listening to learn about something you love or something you care about. The benefit of this is that you will also improve your listening skills, right? Because you want to pay attention, you want to listen to them, you want to learn about this topic, but they're using English. Also, if they're using English regarding a topic that you have some knowledge about, being able to understand new language they use will be easier for you because you'll have a good contextual understanding of the information. I personally am very interested in computers. I like computer hardware. I like computer software. I like learning about new technologies and things like that. So if I were learning Japanese, for example, it might be a good idea for me to find a Japanese podcast about the new technologies in Sony or Panasonic or another Japanese technology company. I will have some basic knowledge about the different technologies they're talking about, maybe the name of the products, maybe the name of some of the new systems they're introducing, but they'll be speaking in Japanese. It might be a bit challenging for me to understand it all, but I'll be much more likely to listen for the whole thing, take notes, pay attention, to come back next week and listen again, because the topic will be interesting to me. So that's what I recommend. Don't try and find a radio station which is just for English learning. Try and find a radio station, a YouTube channel, a podcast, anything with audio which talks about a topic you're interested in. YouTube's great for this because they also have a visual aid. So if they are talking about something you're interested in, they probably also have a picture, an image, or some video to support it. And again, that will help you understand what they're talking about much more clearly because they'll have some visual representation to back it up. It won't just be audio and voice. Yeah, that's what I recommend. Okay, guys, just keep throwing the questions out. Are you going to give lessons in this live class in the future? No, definitely the plan in the future is to come with each class with a topic. I'm thinking about 30 to 45 minutes built around a specific topic. We'll try and do a few different things. We'll do grammar, we'll do vocabulary, we'll do pronunciation. These are things a lot of people struggle with but are important to learn. And then we'll do a question and answer session at the end. Probably about 15 to 20 minutes of questions specifically about the topic, and then another 5, 10, 15 minutes open questions about anything. The purpose of today's lesson, which is my first lesson, is just to, first of all, test the technology. This is the first time I'm live streaming, so there's a lot to learn, there's a lot going on. If the camera was switched around and you could see my screen, you'll see there's quite a few different things happening now which I have to monitor. So I wanted to make sure that the technology works, that the lighting is okay, that the audio is okay, that the video is okay. So when we actually do a lesson, I don't have to worry about these things. I only have to worry about presenting it clearly, answering your questions clearly. I'll also probably get a whiteboard to put behind me here. I think that'll be much nicer, that I can do some writing on. But again, I have a light situated over here. You can probably see my hand is very pale against the light. I'll need to work out how those things will work. I just wanted to test the system today, make sure everything's working fine. So yeah, specific topics in the future. If you have, there is some noise. It could be from the air conditioning. I have the aircon positioned directly above me. I'm trying to make it go over my head so it doesn't hit my microphone. So I apologize if you can hear some crackling. I live in a very hot country, so I do need the aircon on. If I change it to the fan mode, I think it will be worse on the microphone. It will be a bit loud. So apologies for that. I might, in the future, be able to change it a little bit so we can turn it off before the class. But it's really hot in my country, very hot. So I apologize for that. Okay, still and yet. Okay, good question. Let's look at still and yet. I want to approach this from the perspective of present perfect tense. This is what I assume is the confusion you might have with still and yet. I'll make a note of these here. For those who haven't seen my video on present perfect tense with for and since, you don't need to see this one. You don't need to see it for this. That's fine. But at the beginning of that video, I mention, oh, that's some bad handwriting. I mentioned that present perfect tense is considered to be what we call a threshold tense. A threshold is a point where something has to be crossed in order to proceed. You can't continue if you don't pass this threshold point. Actually, if you open a door, if you look at the bottom, there's a thin strip of wood or a thin strip of plastic. That's called the threshold. It's the point from the outside of the room to the inside of the room. So present perfect is a threshold tense. We consider present simple, past simple, and present continuous or present progressive tenses to be basic or simple or beginner level tenses. Present perfect is what takes you to the next level in English. It's also quite confusing because there are many different ways that we use present perfect tense. Most tenses have one, maybe two different situations where they can be used. Present perfect has, off the top of my head, 4 different ways it can be used. And some of them are very, very different to each other, so it can be confusing. With still and yet, we use them to talk about things that have happened in the past or have not happened in the past, which have an impact in the present. The most common way we use yet, we'll talk about yet first, is to say that something has not been done, but it will be done in the future. An example of that would be, I haven't finished my homework yet. If we look at the structure of I haven't finished, that's the present perfect tense, right? We have the subject plus have or has I, you, we, they, we use have. He, she, it, has. So I haven't finished. Finished is actually verb 3 or the past participle. In the case of finished, it's a regular verb. It ends with an ed. So verb 2 and verb 3 are identical. But if it was, for example, eat, we'd say I haven't eaten yet, not I haven't ate yet. I haven't finished my homework yet. In this sentence, yet means it's not done, but it will be done. I have the intention to do it, but maybe I didn't have time. Maybe I was too lazy. If it's homework, I was probably too lazy. Or maybe it was too confusing, I couldn't do it. I haven't finished my homework yet. Still, we normally put before the tense. So yet, we put afterwards. I haven't finished my homework yet. Still goes before. I still haven't finished my homework. This emphasizes more that there's a big delay in the work being done. Maybe your boss comes to you and says, have you finished this report? And you say, I haven't finished the report yet. You're telling your boss that you have the intention to do it, but not yet. If your boss then comes back an hour later and says, have you finished your report? Then you have been a bit lazy, or maybe you were too busy. Then you might have to emphasize that it's still incomplete by using still. I still haven't finished my report. Again, still goes before present perfect, yet goes after it. But they're both used to say that something is not complete, but you have the intention of completing it in the future. Okay, I would like to know the difference between it and its. What's up? But not in terms of contractions. We have two different... Okay, it's and it. Let's do it's and it. That's fine. So you're not worried about the contractions. You understand that it's is a contraction of it is, and it doesn't have an apostrophe because it's not a contraction. That's the first hint. They are not the same thing. Its is actually a pronoun. It is not a subject pronoun. It is not an object pronoun. It's a possessive adjective. So we'd say, as an example, it's... if we're looking at maybe a pet dog or cat, I don't know if you have a pet dog or cat, we could say, its dinner, using the last one, hasn't been finished yet. It's dinner. So I have its before the dinner. It's to show that the dinner belongs to the subject, in this case, it. It's dinner. We don't use the apostrophe for that one, right? That's just it's. It's a possessive adjective. We use a noun directly after its. So let me just make a note of that. It's plus noun. So again, this is a possessive adjective. The noun belongs to it. It's the same as his, her, my, your, but just with the subject it. That's all. It is quite confusing in that there's lots of different ways we can use it. We can use it with adjectives, right? It is hot. It is cold. We can use it with present progressive, present continuous tense. It is raining. It is snowing. It is rainy. It is snowy. In that case, they're both adjectives. Yeah. So it is, I'm sure you have a good understanding of how to use that. It's just a subject pronoun plus the verb to be, in this case is. Its is a possessive adjective. Use it before a noun to show that the noun belongs to it. That's it. And you also had a question about what and what up and what's up. Is that could you confirm? And apologies if I pronounce your name wrong. Is it Nafisa? Could you confirm what you mean? If you want to say what up and what's up. If that's the question, if what up and what's up is the question, they're both very, they're slang, they're very conversational, they're very informal language. What up is just a lazier way of saying what's up. They have the same meaning. What up is, I want to say it's incorrect. It's not correct language. It's not correct grammar. What's up is, it's not the most professional way to speak. If I'm hanging out with my friends, I might say, what's up? It means the same as, how are you? What have you been doing? What are you up to? Just a greeting, what's up? And what up is the same meaning, but it's just even more slang. That's it. Woo, okay, some special tips to learn phrasal verbs. Okay, so before I give you some tips about how to learn phrasal verbs, I'll just give a quick overview of what a phrasal verb is. A phrasal verb is when you take a verb and you put it together with a preposition, usually a preposition. The reason why these are complicated is because the meaning is almost always what we can consider to be a metaphorical meaning. That means there's no literal understanding between the verb, between the phrasal verb and the meaning of it. Some of them are literal. So for example, if I say stand up, it's literally asking the person to go up into a standing position. Stand up. Same is true for sit down. Stand is the verb, sit is the verb, up is the preposition, down is the preposition. Sit, down, stand, up. Those make sense. The confusion comes from when the verb and the preposition combine and you have no idea what could it possibly mean. You probably do know the meaning to this one. Shut up, right? Shut up. This means be quiet. There is no way, unless you've heard it used or someone's taught you, that you could predict the meaning of shut up just by listening and just by thinking of the verb shut, thinking about, no, you're never going to get it. That's why you have to do some studying. That's what you're asking for, some tips to study. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of phrasal verbs. They are things that native English speakers just know. We don't have to think about them. They just come out naturally. It's because we've heard them hundreds and thousands of times before. In TV shows, in movies, reading them in books, just talking with our friends and family. We use phrasal verbs without thinking. The best way you can learn phrasal verbs is through, in my opinion, is through listening. Normally, phrasal verbs can be understood based on the context that you're hearing them. A good way for this is, I personally prefer to recommend TV shows and movies for this because you have a visual aid. If people are communicating with each other and one of them uses a phrasal verb which you're not familiar with, you can see it, how they react, and you might be able to predict what's the meaning there. Unfortunately, because a lot of them are not literal, they are metaphorical, you will not always be able to predict the meaning based on what they say. So you will have to do some research. I'd recommend taking a note. If you really can't use the context to work it out, make a note of it and check it out online later. That's basically all you can do. Be aware, though, that some phrasal verbs have multiple meanings. For example, put up. If I say put up, it could mean to literally to put up a picture. Maybe I have some space, there you go, behind me. You see there's some space on the wall. I might put up a picture on the wall there. Put up can also mean to deal with something. If I have a friend who's always complaining, just shouting at me, blah, 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 because they're my friend, I will put up with it. I will deal with it. I will allow it to happen. I won't get too upset. I won't get angry. I won't shout at them. If I'm on public transport and somebody's shouting at me and I don't know why this person is attacking me, I won't put up with that. I'll tell them to be quiet. I might even tell them to shut up if they're being particularly rude to me. So sometimes phrasal verbs have more than one definition. So when you make a note of them after hearing, make sure when you check the definition, it makes logical sense based on how you heard it. So you're using it in the right way. So yeah, Raza, that's what I'd recommend for phrasal verbs. Watch some TV shows, watch some movies. Try and understand the meaning through context. If that's not possible, that's okay. Make a note, look up the definition later. Make sure you're matching the right definition to the situation that you heard it in on the movie, on the TV show. Hopefully that answers your question. If there's something else, just post it in the chat and I'll add to that. Okay, great to have you guys all here. Please, just any question you have, if you want a tip, if you want something more specific, if you have a very general question about me, about English, whatever you can think of, just post it in the chat and I'll get round to it. Raza, you're welcome. No problem. My pleasure. While we're waiting for some more questions to come through, by the way, you don't need to wait for me to stop speaking to ask a question. Just post it there. I'll come back to it. There's no worry. We don't have a lot of people here today. We can get through basically every question, I'm sure. It won't be a problem. So just post it. I'll come back to it. While we're waiting for more questions to come through, I want to keep on the topic of tips that you can use every day to improve your English. If you haven't seen my latest English quick tip video, I talked about building your mind and building your brain to think in English. This comes back to the topic Raza mentioned about phrasal verbs, that native English speakers use them without thinking. They're very natural to us. If you are trying to translate a phrasal verb from English to your native language, 90% of the time it won't work. You cannot do that. It's just not going to make any sense. You have to change your brain to begin to think in English to really progress to a high level user. One tip I recommend to a lot of my students, especially those studying Ielts, this is a great tip for Ielts students because in the speaking section, the examiner will ask them a lot of questions which they probably haven't heard before, and so they have to be very flexible and able to use the language and think on the fly, which means think as you're speaking rather than planning in advance. One tip I recommend for them to think in English is as you're going about your daily life, maybe you take a public transport to work, maybe you have a lot of colleagues in your office, maybe if you're still at school, you see kids playing every day, you see people eating lunch in the cafeteria. Make up stories in your mind about them, about their history, about who they are, about what they're doing today, what they did this morning, what they did yesterday, what they're planning on doing. It doesn't have to be advanced stuff. It doesn't have to be difficult grammar. It just has to be in English. The more you drill this, the more you repeat this, the more you'll begin to think in English when you start making up stories, when you start telling stories. You won't go, maybe in your language, you want to say, this person is going to play football after school. So you say that in your own language, and then you try and switch that into English and work it out piece by piece. That's not a good way to speak fluently. That's okay for accuracy, but it's not great for fluency. So if you start to make up stories and use them in English, don't worry too much about your grammatical accuracy. Just speak, right? It's just in your mind. Nobody can hear you. If you're wrong, who cares? Just try and think in English about what they're doing in their life, and you'll begin to find that your listening comprehension improves a lot, but also your speaking fluency improves a lot. Okay, some of the most known and used phrasal verbs. All right. Let's look at, and we got a couple of great questions from Nafisa after, and Raza, I'll speak to you about Ielts and TOEFL. That's also a great question. Some of the most phrasal verbs. How about we do some technology? phrasal verbs, right? We all live in a world where we have mobile phones, we have laptops, we have computers. You'll notice that some of them are literal phrasal verbs. You can work out the meaning by just listening. Other ones are entirely metaphorical. You'll have no idea what they mean unless somebody translates them. Okay, so first thing you do when you want to use your computer is you turn on your computer. You turn on. A common mistake people make is the difference between open and turn on. Many people will say, open my phone, open my computer. In English, if it's an electronic device, we turn on our electronic device. We open a book, open a window, something which has no automation to it, nothing electronic. We have to manually do it. Open the book, open the window. We can turn on a computer. Another more modern word for that is boot up. We would not boot up our phone, but we do boot up a computer. We use boot up when something has stages or steps to become on. If I boot up my computer, you'll probably notice there's a black screen called the BIOS, right, where it has all that text on it, a lot of confusing computer language that nobody really understands. And then maybe there'll be the splash screen with the Windows logo or Mac logo if you use Apple. And then the computer actually starts. So we can say boot up the computer or turn on the computer. The opposite of that is to shut down your computer or turn off. Right? Turn on, opposite, turn off. Boot up, opposite, shut down. Shut down is something that, again, has to go through steps to become off. I don't just press a button and my computer's off. It has to close some of the programs, close some of the applications, begin to turn off all the background stuff, and then it goes off. If I look at a light, for example, I can turn on a light and I can turn off a light. It's electronic, so I must say turn on and turn off. I cannot say open, close. But there's no steps. Press the button, it's on. Press the button, it's off. Turn on, turn off. Computer, boot up, shut down. Those are probably the most common ones we use for modern day tech. Raza, Ielts, and TOEFL. Which one you choose will probably be dependent on where you want to study. I guess if you're looking at the Ielts and TOEFL, you might have the intention of attending an international university, maybe to do a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or some tertiary education. Some universities are great. They accept Ielts and TOEFL, and I have a recommendation if they accept both. Other universities are strict. They say, I want Ielts and I want this score, I want TOEFL, I want this score. If you can choose which one to take, which it sounds like that's what you have the option of Ielts or TOEFL, I always recommend Ielts. I personally believe Ielts is a much simpler exam. Significantly more simple, actually, really a lot. There are some aspects of TOEFL which are not too scary, they're not too difficult, but the reading section, the listening section in particular, is really, really tricky. Ielts listening is similar to TOEIC listening in that the language tends to be not as complex. The listening doesn't go on for so long. TOEFL is long listenings. They're talking about very complex subjects. They're talking at a high rate of speech, and you have to take notes all the way through, and it gets very complicated. So I'd recommend Ielts if you have the choice between Ielts and TOEFL. You normally can get a better score with Ielts when compared to TOEFL. If the university doesn't give you a choice, unfortunately, you just have to do whatever they tell you to do. If you have any more questions about that, you can post in the comments or post in the chat. I'll get back to you on that. That's no problem. Okay, the difference between a material noun and a concrete noun. My understanding of, Okay, sure. I've actually, and it might be a US versus UK thing, I'm not sure. Material nouns and concrete nouns, the words often used interchangeably. But I think the confusion you're having is that there's another definition for material noun, which we'll look at. I hope you've seen my video this week on the topic of nouns. If you haven't, I recommend watching it. But I'll answer your question about material nouns and concrete nouns now. There are a couple of main categories of nouns. We have concrete nouns and abstract nouns. Material nouns are actually a type of concrete noun, so it's another branch. Abstract nouns are things which exist, but we cannot physically interact with them. We cannot touch them, we cannot see them, but they exist. These are things like happiness, sadness, confusion, love, hatred, anger. They exist, right? They are true things, but I cannot physically touch them or I cannot physically interact with them. Those are abstract nouns. Concrete nouns are the opposite. These are things which I can physically touch or physically interact with. If I look around me now, my phone, that's a concrete noun. Remote from my aircon, concrete. Mouse, concrete. Even uncountables like water, coffee, tea, those are all concrete nouns. If you can physically interact with them, we consider them to be concrete nouns. A material noun is a noun which is literally a material. A material is something that things are made from. If I go back to the example of my aircon remote, you'll see it's plastic. Plastic is a material noun. It's a material. I have a glass of water over here. In this case, the water is concrete noun. It's something that's physical, but nothing is made of water. But the cup is made of glass. Glass is a material noun. So anything which is a material, we can consider to be a material noun. Plastic, glass, wood, paper, concrete. I think that's probably where your confusion comes from. Concrete is a material noun because buildings are made from concrete. My wall here, that's made of concrete. But the word concrete noun does not mean the same thing as this concrete. It means physical noun. So concrete is material. Cloth, my shirt is made from cotton, I think. Okay, so that's a material. Silk, leather, my wallet's leather. Metal, my watch is made of metal. There you go. These are all material nouns. So material nouns are a kind of concrete noun. They're another branch. They are things that other things are made of or made from. I hope, Nafisa, that answers your question. If you're still confused, let me know, and I'll explain it a little bit more. Raza, you had a question, but you retracted it. I want to know, what was your question? Was it something rude, something naughty that you feel bad about asking? While we're speaking about nouns, I'll go into a little bit more detail about measure words and how they can be used with countables and uncountable nouns. I'll start with the difference between a countable and an uncountable and how measure words come into play. Countable noun is something that we can divide into we can count into individual units, right? So if we look around my room, for example, you can see I have, it's a bit dark. There's a light there, a light bulb in there, and there we go, and a light bulb in there. So light bulbs, right? The actual glass thing that you screw in, a light bulb, is a countable noun. I can count them. But light, which is what is being emitted from the light bulb, is an uncountable noun. I cannot count how much light is coming off of that. I can measure it with some scientific equipment, but I cannot count it. So light bulbs, countable, light, uncountable. Liquids are uncountable. Water, coffee, tea, soda, all uncountable. But we can change an uncountable noun into countable noun with a measure word. If we use the example of coffee, we can change coffee, which is uncountable, into countable by using the measure words a cup of coffee or a mug of coffee. A mug is like a really big cup. It's what they use a lot in America, with the big handles. It's a mug. And if we want to make the uncountable with the measure word plural, we have to pluralize the measure word. So a cup of coffee becomes 2 cups of coffee. Remember to use the S. A mug of coffee changes to 2 mugs of coffee. The difference between American and British language, except for accents. Okay. There's actually a huge number of differences. Accents are the most notable for non-native speakers because they just sound different, right? And 90% of the vocabulary is identical, 95%, because the grammar doesn't change from English to American. But the vocabulary does change quite a lot. I'll give you some examples of British words versus American words, but there are hundreds of different ones. A road, right, where cars drive along a road. On the side of the road, there's usually a strip on either side for pedestrians. Pedestrians are people walking, pedestrians to walk on. In the UK, in England, we say this is called the pavement. P-A-V-E-M-E-N-T, pavement. In the US, they call this the sidewalk. It's literally the same thing, 100% the same thing, but we just have a different word for it. After I'm in the bathroom, I want to wash my hands. In England, I will use the tap to wash my hands. In America, they use what's called a faucet. Again, it's the same thing, just a different word. So apart from accents, vocabulary is the biggest difference between American and British English. There are some small grammar differences, but more often than not, that's just one group of people not using the correct grammar. I don't want to say Americans use incorrect grammar and British people use correct grammar, because it actually depends on the city or the town within the country. There are parts of the UK where incorrect grammar has become assimilated and used as daily English, and there are also parts of the US where the same things have happened. Incorrect grammar has become part of the daily English. So accent's probably the most noticeable difference for a non-native speaker, but vocabulary is actually if you have everything written down, it's the vocabulary that's the biggest difference between US and British English. Grammar is there, but it's a much smaller difference. Nafisa, don't worry. If you don't get everything, I'll upload it. You can watch it back. That's fine. Like I said, the main purpose of today is just to test to make sure everything is working. I do want to answer some questions, but in the future, we'll have some more interactive materials. I'll have a board. We'll have specific topics. We'll go a little bit more slowly. We'll go into more detail. So even people who are learning at a slower pace, everybody learns at different speeds. Even people who learn at a slower pace will eventually, by the end of the lesson, understand it. I'll also add some advanced detail so the faster learners don't feel bored because they still have new things to learn. The difference between what's and what's with the apostrophe, right? As in, what is. I'm not sure. Could you give me an example of a sentence with what's without an apostrophe? I cannot think of a sentence where what's could be used without an apostrophe. What is always contracted to what's with the apostrophe. The only thing I can think of which doesn't have an apostrophe is WhatsApp. And that's because it's a little bit of a joke. It's a play on words or a pun on what's up. WhatsApp, what's up, like that. Yes, good point, Nafisa. Yeah, I'll come back to that, what you just mentioned. That's great. Yeah, what's without the apostrophe, it doesn't sound like correct English to me. If you give me an example sentence, I'll take a look at it. But from my brain, I can only think of what apostrophe s, what's, like that, not what's without an apostrophe. Raza, going back to your question on American and British English, the spelling is a bigger difference, especially in more and more modern English. And yeah, Nafisa pointed out that American English is a little bit simplified, which you could argue is true. In the UK, we add U to a lot of words, like color. We have O-U-R. In the US, they just cut the U away, throw it away. It's just C-O-L-O-R. They also use a lot of Zs or Zs instead of S's, where we use S's in the UK. There's some spelling difference, but you can always know what the word is if it's US or UK spelling. The difference will not be so big that you won't be able to read the word. If I learn the English spelling and I try to read the word with the US spelling, you'll be able to work out what it is. It's never going to be such a big difference that you cannot possibly understand what the word is because it's spelled so differently. Raza, I asked you a week before, I would like some more clarity. Sure. Bring me a glass of water, or bring a glass of water for me. Bring me a glass of water, comma, please. Make sure you're polite. You'd better even say, could you please, or could you bring me a glass of water, please. Is a much more natural way of saying that. We could say, bring a glass of water for me, but it's not a particularly natural way. It's not grammatically incorrect. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not a sentence structure that we use often in English. So don't feel like it's incorrect to say for me. Just know that we would much more naturally say, bring me something. We could use for me, or for with a different object pronoun at the end, if we really want to specify that this particular thing you're asking for is for this person. But normally that wouldn't be for me, unless the person looks confused, like, who is this for? I don't know. And you say, for me. If my friend is sick, and I ask somebody, I said, oh, could you bring some medicine for him? I'm specifying that the medicine is not for me, it's for him. In that case, for with the object pronoun at the end of the sentence is not a bad choice. But I could also say, bring him some medicine. If the listener cannot see him, then we'd have to put the for him at the end of the sentence, because they don't know who him is. So could you bring some medicine for Peter? Peter's not here. I have to put the Peter at the end of the sentence. The reason why we don't say for me at the end that often is because if you're speaking with the person, you will always be there in front of them. So we don't need to specify who's it for so clearly at the end of the sentence. Just bring me this. Again, I recommend, however, not saying just bring me this. Be polite. At least put please at the end. Better still, could you or would you mind bringing me is much nicer. I have a video on making requests and things like that. So you might want to check out that to see some of the different options you have, and also how they advance from informal all the way to the most formal options, like would you mind bringing me? Yes, English is 100% my native language. If I couldn't speak English, I couldn't speak any language. I would be left unable to communicate. I know some basic Spanish. I know some basic of some other Asian languages, but English is my native language. I was born in the UK. My family, they're all from the UK. I moved to the US, like I said earlier, when I was 3 years old. Lived there for a while. All schools I've been to have been English-speaking schools, purely English-speaking schools. So English is my native language. One thing that is important to note about native English speakers, and something that people are often quite surprised by, is that a lot of native English speakers, even though they know to use the correct grammar, they know how to use the correct vocabulary, they don't know the rules behind the language. Because we don't learn this in our school system. We don't learn the grammatical structure when we're studying at school. It's only when you study how to teach the English language that you begin to learn about the structure of the tenses and the structure of conditional sentences and things like that. They don't teach you that at school. Because it's your native language, you don't think about it. It just comes out naturally. But then when you have to study to learn how to teach, you have to know the formula, if you will, behind the language. So when students are confused and they're putting the words in the wrong order, you can explain to them that, no, it should be in this order because that's the structure of this particular grammar point. So a lot of native English speakers will use past perfect continuous tense without even blinking, without thinking. They'll just say it. But if you ask them, what tense did you just use? They probably will have no idea. They have no idea what the name of it is. They might not even realize that it is a tense. They go, oh, is that a tense? I guess it's past something. They don't know. They definitely don't know what the grammatical structure is because they haven't studied that. So with native English speakers, if you want to ask them a question, if you're a bit confused by something, understand that if they're not a teacher, you'll have to be careful with how technical the language is that you ask them. We had some questions before about material nouns and concrete nouns. If I asked, for example, my mother, who's not an English teacher, but her English is perfect, what's the difference between a material noun and a concrete noun, she would have no idea how to answer that question. She would know what a noun is, but she wouldn't know the difference between a material noun and a concrete noun because she hasn't studied English education, teaching English. So just be aware that if you are asking a native English speaker about some technical side of the language, try and simplify your question so they can help you, because you probably have a better technical knowledge than they do. It's something a lot of learners don't know. They have better technical knowledge about the English language, in particular the words and some of the jargon behind the language, than native speakers do. How long have I been teaching English? I have been teaching English for 4 years now. I started at the beginning of 2013. I've taught in large government schools with about 50 students in a class. Currently, I teach in a private language school, and it's mostly one-on-one classes, although I do some small group classes as well. So we teach all ages, all levels. I've had an 80-year-old lady learning English who doesn't speak any English. I've also taught 4-year-old kids who go to international schools and are very, very strong, but need to improve their reading and writing, things like that. Raza, how many languages can you speak? I can speak one language. I can speak one language fluently. I can speak English perfectly. I can speak Spanish, but I learned Spanish a long time ago, so I have a good memory for the vocabulary, and my listening is quite strong. But if I had to do any writing or speaking, my level would drop very quickly. I'm probably about an elementary Spanish speaker, if you're familiar with those levels. And also I speak Thai. I can speak, again, just the elementary level of Thai, but my comprehension, my listening is not too bad. Yeah, Nafisa, you've mentioned that speaking English, living in an English-speaking country is the best way, and it's 100% true. Even if it's for a short time, like a 3-month exchange program or a 6-month study and work program, something like that, it's so useful to be. It's a bit scary, but it's incredibly powerful to be thrown into a situation where speaking English is the only option you have to get by. If I don't communicate in English with this person, they will not understand me. That's basically the option you have. What you'll find is for the first few days, people in this situation tend to not speak to anyone. They're too nervous, they're too afraid to communicate. They're worried about making themselves sounding foolish, sounding stupid. But once you realize that you have enough knowledge to communicate your meaning to the person, you begin to not be so fearful of grammatical accuracy, so fearful about using the wrong words. And you find that, oh, I can actually speak to these people. They're normal people. They understand what I'm saying, even if I'm not saying it correctly. And also, it's perfect for practicing your listening. Your vocabulary will improve so quickly if you get to live in an English-speaking country, for sure. I had a student studying with me, and she was an intermediate level student, and she went on exchange to America, to the US, for a year, just for 1 year. And by the time she came back, her level had changed from intermediate to advanced. We have pre-intermediate, intermediate, upper intermediate, advanced. So it's a big jump. And just living in that country for 1 year, her English improved so much. So yeah, 100%. To remove the hesitation, even if you don't live there, visiting it for 3 months, 6 months is a great way to improve your English. Raza, four languages. What 4 languages can you speak? That's incredible. English is one. What is your native language? Guys, post your native language in the comments. I'd like to find out what language you guys speak. I'm trying to learn, trying to recognize which parts of the world people come from based on their names. I can narrow it down to a general region, but I'm not good at specifying the actual country. So post in the chat where you come from and what is your native language. I'd love to know. Just as you guys are posting, I've just had a look at the time. We actually went on for a little bit longer than I had planned, but we had some good questions coming through, so I didn't want to cut off while still answering some of your questions. I'd really appreciate it if you could give me some feedback on what I want to focus on is more about the technical side of it. How was the audio? How was the video? Tell me, were you using a mobile phone? Were you using a laptop? This kind of information is really great for me to prepare my setup. If everyone is using a mobile phone, I have to make the screen as big as possible, so I might be able to remove some of the extra stuff. If people are using a desktop or a laptop, then we have a little bit more space to work with. I can add a few more elements. I don't have to have such a simple structure. But if everyone's using mobile, we have to simplify things. Also, let me know about things you'd like to learn in the future, specific topics. Like I said, this first class is just going to be to test the system, make sure everything's working okay, and I think it works fine. I would like to add a board in the background. It will be very important when I'm actually teaching the different lessons. But apart from that, I think everything's okay. I'll also have a nicer setup in the future. English, Urdu, Hindi, and Pushto. That's impressive. That's many more languages that I can speak. Which is your native tongue? My experiences about teaching, sure. Teaching is a very scary job at first. Not many people expect it to be scary, but it is. It's very intimidating. You're sitting in a classroom with, in my case, my first teaching experience was in a government school with about 50 students staring at me. So you imagine if you're doing a presentation, you're a bit intimidated, right? But this is 50 people just sitting there looking at you, expecting you to produce something, to make them understand something that in the past they didn't understand. That's not an easy thing to do. So it's quite scary at the beginning. Because also the English language is so huge, there's a lot to learn, a lot to learn. A lot to learn from the perspective of teaching it, not only the perspective of learning it. So the teaching course you take is about teaching philosophy, about how to prepare your lessons, how to present, activities you can use to help people practice the language, activities you can use at the end for them to produce or replicate the language in a natural environment. You learn a lot about the theory of English teaching, but there's too much for them to teach you. Like, okay, this is how you present present simple tense. This is how you teach past perfect progressive tense. You don't learn that. You have to teach yourself the best way to present that language. So there's a lot to learn. It's an intimidating job at first. It's also quite a difficult job because there's a lot to learn. It's also an incredibly rewarding job. It's challenging, but you feel like you've gained so much at the end of it, especially a good class. When you know you've helped somebody learn, you know that at the beginning of the class they couldn't do this, but now they can do this. It's actually an amazing feeling to know you've helped this individual, specifically with something that they couldn't do, but now they can do. So it's a little bit intimidating, it's difficult, but it's very rewarding. Yeah, Nafisa, it'll take you a long time to really practice teaching each point enough times that you no longer need to think about how you want to teach it. It actually just becomes almost natural in, oh, okay, I'm teaching this. I need to present it like this. Then I'm going to do this activity. Then we're going to practice it like that. It takes time. You'll probably have to teach it a few times. You'll make some mistakes. You'll make a lot of mistakes. But you can learn from those mistakes. You'll present something. They won't understand it. Okay, that's fine. Just learn. Why did they not understand it when I presented it in this way? Very important to learn from your mistakes. Reflect on what you've taught and how you've taught it. Decide what was good, keep that. Decide what didn't work, throw that away. Raza, I teach English, but not just English, general English. We teach Ielts, TOEFL, academic writing, phonics classes, business English, TOEIC, as well as Ielts and TOEFL. Basically everything. Yeah, I heard that there's some noise. Again, another question about the noise from the microphone. When I listen back after we finish today, I'll see if I can identify what the issue with the microphone is. I'm using this little clip mic here. It's from a good company. I've used it in the past. I know it's good, but I might change it for a nice desk mic. I think it'll just be a higher quality for everyone, because I want to make sure the audio is really clear. A lot of people think that the video quality is the most important thing for videos, but I disagree. I think audio quality, especially when you're teaching a language, is more important. The difference between TOEFL and TOEFL, asks Nafisa. TOEFL spelled T-E-F-L, TOEFL spelled T-O-E-F-L. TOEFL is a qualification to teach English. It stands for, if I'm not mistaken, teaching English as a foreign language. T-E-F-L, TOEFL. TOEFL is the test people take to prove they have a certain level of English. So in the earlier, I think it was Raza, let me just confirm Raza was asking about taking the Ielts test or the TOEFL test. That is not to qualify as an English teacher. That is to prove you have a certain standard or level of English to qualify you to attend a university or attend a college, something like that. TOEFL, without the O, is a qualification to teach the English language. The three most common qualifications for English teaching are TOEFL, T-E-F-L, TESOL, T-E-S-O-L, and a CELTA, C-E-L-T-A. You can also get a Delta, which is like an advanced level CELTA. It's for teaching other teachers. So yeah, TOEFL, if you want to become an English teacher, you must get a TOEFL. TOEFL is if you want to attend an English language institute, an English language university. It's to prove that you have a certain level of English. Seems like we've changed the topic a little bit from English questions to teacher questions, which is okay. I never mind speaking about teaching. Quite a lot of the people who follow me on Facebook and on YouTube are English teachers in their home country, and they ask me a lot of questions about how can I present this, how can I teach that, what material do you use here, which I think is great. If you are a teacher and you are unsure about how to teach something, give me a message through YouTube, through Facebook. We also have Instagram. You can message me there. That's fine. And I'll do my best to share my experiences teaching that particular thing. I've pretty much taught every aspect of the English language about 10 plus times now because of the nature of the teaching I do, teaching all levels and all ages and all different areas of English. I've covered everything at least once. So I've made mistakes, and I'm happy to share with you what mistakes I've made so you don't make the same mistakes as I do. Okay, I think we'll probably, unless we have any more questions in the next few seconds, we'll probably end it there. We've gone a little bit longer than I had planned, but that's okay. I was happy to answer your questions. Next time, we will have a specific topic we'll look at, probably about 30 minutes. We'll then do a question and answer session related to the topic, so I can answer some of your questions that you weren't comfortable with, things that you didn't quite understand from the lesson. Then we'll do an open question and answer, 10, 15 minutes, any topic you want, any questions you have about anything English related, we'll answer that. If you don't follow me on Facebook, I think most of you probably do, follow our page there. I'll put a link into the chat now. Follow me there. I always update with what's coming up, and you can follow there and you'll know, okay, next week this is a topic. Probably not for a couple of weeks until we do the next live stream. We'll see how things go. I'm quite busy at the moment, and I like to produce a few of my pre-recorded videos with editing, and they take some time. But I would like to do more live streams with focused topics. So the best way to learn vocab. I made a video on this. This is just a tip I use. What I normally recommend for learning vocabulary is do whatever you can to make it not boring. This is the most difficult thing people have with learning vocabulary, is that it's quite boring, right? You have a list of 10 words, you got to study them, write them, study them, write them. It's very easy to lose motivation to do this if that's what you're doing day in, day out. So what I'd recommend for vocabulary is similar to what I recommended before, actually, with the podcasts and the radio stations, is to find something you're interested in, but not listening. Probably with reading is much better. Web pages are great for this. Books and magazines are great for this. Find something that you're interested in, and then just read that. And make a note, highlight the vocabulary from that article, from that topic you don't understand, and teach yourself that vocabulary. You won't become as bored. There is still the drill and repeat aspect to it. As you make the list of vocabulary, you do need to do a bit of drilling, covering it up. Can I remember it? Yes. Also, you have to remember to learn how to use the vocabulary in a sentence. Don't just remember the word and the definition. That's not enough. You need to be able to remember how to use that word in a sentence. Knowing what the part of speech is will help a lot. Is it a noun? Is it an adjective, verb, adverb, preposition, interjection, whatever? Understanding that part of speech is important. Also write down some example sentences with the word in it, using your own ideas. Don't copy the ideas from the magazine, from the book. Make something new, make something original, which is true to you. It'll help you remember it much better. I'm very glad to help you, Nafisa. I hope you did. I hope everyone learned something. And like I said, next time we'll have something more specific. We'll have a topic to go through. I do like the format of open questions. I don't like when people ask me a question and I don't have time to answer it. I get frustrated. I want to answer everyone's questions. So I always want to leave plenty of time at the end for questions and answers where people can feel happy to ask me anything. If I just speak at you and I don't acknowledge your questions, I'm not a teacher, I'm a professor. That's what professors do at university. They come into the class, they have their topic, they speak. You write. That's the end. You go home, they go home. A teacher has to be able to interact with a student, find out what they understand, what they don't understand, and fix that problem. So that's what I want to do. So I will always have a question and answer session at the end of my lessons, but I would like to begin to introduce specific topics at the beginning. Probably 50-50. 50% topic, 50% question and answer, something like that. Okay, we'll end it there. We've gone on for a little bit longer than I expected. I thought it would be about 60 minutes. We went for 90 minutes, but that's great. Anything else you unsure about, post a comment, I'll answer it. Send me a message, I'll answer it. Enrique, how are you? How can music in English help to learn or improve my listening? Okay, I will answer this question. And Nafisa, I'm glad. Your English is fine, don't worry. Everyone always underestimates their level of English. They always think they're worse than they are. Trust me, and everyone always does that. How can I improve my English through listening to music? Carefully. Be very careful with which music you choose to use to improve your English. Lyrics, which are the words in a song, do not follow grammar rules 80% of the time. The writer of the song will normally break the rules of grammar to fit the tune that they're playing the music to. So lyrics can be good for natural English, they can be good for vocabulary, they can be good for what we talked about, phrasal verbs earlier. Don't use lyrics or music to improve your grammar. It won't. It'll make your grammar worse. But for vocabulary, lyrics are great. For modern English, like really, really modern cultural English, music is great. Because musicians and artists always like to use the latest language, the newest language in their music. I learn a lot of new slang from the US by listening to American artists. I don't live in America, I'm not from America, and if I watch American TV, they normally don't use a lot of this advanced language. So music is a great way. Yeah, Nike, listening only to music is good for vocabulary. It's not good for grammar. Really not good for grammar. You do need to do additional studying. You need to actively try and learn that the core tenses, the fundamental grammar. Otherwise, it's just not enough. Listening is not enough. It helps. It's good to support your English, but it is not sufficient to learn English. So be careful with music. All right, guys. That's the end for today. It's a little bit late. I'm going to go to bed. I have work tomorrow. I have to do some more teaching, but that's okay. I love it. Questions, comments, just post them below. I'll get round to answering all of them, I promise. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, we have it all. Comments, you can find all the links to those things. If you want to attend more of these classes, which will be more topic focused, click subscribe. I put out new videos every Tuesday, which focus on a specific topic. We cover pronunciation, we cover grammar, we also cover vocabulary, and we also post every Thursday a tip video, just something really quick, something that you can immediately use in your English every day to improve. Vocabulary tips, grammar tips, ways to think in English, ways to be more confident when you speak, things like that. On our Facebook page, every day we have a word of the day. People post their sentences using their new word. I check it. I make sure the grammar is okay. I make sure the spelling's okay. We do grammar quizzes 4 times a week where we use the topic from the video of that week in a grammar quiz so everyone can make sure they really understand the grammar I've presented. We also have some open Ask Me Anything sessions where for an hour, 2 hours, it's just completely open for people to ask any questions they want, and I answer them all. Again, we normally like to keep questions more specific, but if people have general questions, that's fine as well. All right, I'm very glad you guys enjoyed it. I try and keep my speaking in check. Sometimes I speak a little bit quickly. If I'm speaking too fast, send me a comment, just send a chat, let me know I'm speaking too quickly, I can slow it down. If I'm speaking too slowly and you want to push your listening skills, I'll speak more quickly, that's fine, I don't mind. I'll do my best to make sure that everyone can understand what I'm saying and everybody can learn something from my classes. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening wherever you are in the world. Have a good afternoon if you're in the US or in South America. If you're in Asia like me, have a good night. See you all next time. Goodbye.